On the 23rd of August, 2023, a spacecraft built in India landed on the south pole of the Moon. Not near the South Pole, not in the general vicinity. On the South Pole, a region of the lunar surface that no nation had ever successfully landed on before. A region of extraordinary scientific interest because of the water ice believed to exist in its permanently shadowed craters. A region that the United States, China, and Russia had all identified as a priority target. A region where a Russian spacecraft had attempted to land just days earlier and crashed. India's Chandrayaan-3 touched down successfully. Its rover rolled out onto the lunar surface. Its instruments began transmitting data, and India became the fourth country in human history to land a spacecraft softly on the Moon and the first to do it at the South Pole. The cost of the entire Chandrayaan-3 mission was approximately $75 million. Hollywood spent more than that making the movie Interstellar. NASA's Mars Perseverance rover cost approximately $2.7 billion. The James Webb Space Telescope cost $10 billion. By the standards of what space exploration normally costs, India put a spacecraft on the Moon for what amounts to a rounding error in most space agency budgets. And Chandrayaan-3 is not an anomaly. It is part of a pattern. India's Mars orbiter mission Mangalyaan reached Mars orbit in 2014 on its very first attempt, making India the first Asian country to reach Mars, and the first country on Earth to do it on a debut mission. The cost was $74 million less than the production budget of the movie Gravity, which was about going to space rather than actually going to space. This is the story of how India does this. How a country that still has hundreds of millions of people living in poverty built a space program capable of landing on the Moon for less money than it costs to make a Hollywood blockbuster. And what the answer to that question tells us about engineering, ambition, necessity, and what happens when a country decides that it simply cannot afford to fail. To understand the Indian Space Research Organization ISRO, you have to go back to 1962 and to a man named Vikram Sarabhai. Sarabhai was a physicist from a wealthy Gujarati family, educated at Cambridge, genuinely brilliant, and possessed of a vision that seemed almost absurdly ambitious for the India of 1962. India in 1962 was 15 years out of British colonialism. It was poor. It was largely agricultural. Its scientific and technical institutions were early in their development, and Sarabhai wanted to build a space program. His argument for why was not about national prestige or military competition. It was simpler and more direct than that. A space program, Sarabhai argued, was the fastest route to developing the advanced technology that India needed for its development communication satellites that could bring education and information to remote villages, weather satellites that could protect the agricultural economy, remote sensing satellites that could map resources and monitor the country at a scale that ground surveys could never match. This was a different argument for a space program than the one being made in Washington or Moscow. The American and Soviet space programs of the 1960s were fundamentally about Cold War competition, military capability, and national prestige. Sarabhai's argument was about development, about what a poor country with a large territory and an enormous, largely rural population actually needed from space technology to improve the lives of its people. That foundational philosophy, space technology in service of development rather than prestige, shaped everything that followed at ISRO. It is the reason ISRO's first rocket parts were transported to the launch site on a bicycle. It is the reason Indian scientists assembled early rockets in a church that had been converted to a laboratory. It is the reason the image of ISRO scientists carrying rocket components by hand, on their shoulders and on bicycles, in the early days of the program, became one of the most iconic images of scientific ambition married to material scarcity. The early decades of ISRO were about building the foundational capabilities, learning to make rockets, learning to put satellites in orbit, developing the institutional knowledge and the engineering workforce that a space program requires. India's first satellite, Aryabhata, was launched in 1975 on a Soviet rocket because India did not yet have a launch vehicle capable of reaching orbit, but the satellite itself was designed and built by Indian engineers. The capability to design the payload was being built even before the capability to launch it existed. Through the 1980s and 1990s, ISRO developed its own launch vehicles. The PSLV, the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, became the workhorse of the Indian space program, a reliable and increasingly versatile rocket that has been used for over 50 missions with an extraordinary success rate. The GSLV, the Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, took longer to develop, particularly its cryogenic upper stage engine, which India had to develop independently after a technology transfer deal with Russia fell through under American pressure in the early 1990s. That episode, the denial of cryogenic engine technology to India, turned out to be one of the most consequential failures of technology denial policy in recent history. India was forced to develop its own cryogenic technology. It took longer, it was harder, but what India eventually built was its own genuinely indigenous, not dependent on any foreign supplier, not subject to any future technology denial. The attempt to limit India's space capability through technology control produced exactly the opposite of its intended effect. Now let's talk about the cost question, because it is the thing that most people find most surprising and most worth understanding. How does ISRO do what it does for the money it spends? The answer is not one thing. It is several things working together. The first is labor costs. India has an enormous pool of highly trained engineers and scientists who earn salaries that are a fraction of what equivalent engineers in the United States or Europe command. ISRO employs approximately 16,000 people. The salary bill for 16,000 engineers in India is dramatically lower than it would be in any Western country. This does not reflect inferior capability, it reflects the Indian wage structure, which is a function of the cost of living, the supply of engineering graduates, and the career expectations of Indian professionals who choose to work for a government research organization rather than the private sector. India graduates approximately 1.5 million engineers per year. The sheer volume of technically educated people available to Indian institutions at Indian wage scales is a structural cost advantage that cannot be replicated in the United States or Europe without replicating India's economic conditions. The second factor is component and manufacturing costs. India manufactures a significant portion of the components used in its space missions domestically at Indian manufacturing costs. Again, not inferior components, just components produced in a lower-cost manufacturing environment. The third factor is institutional culture. ISRO operates with an extreme reluctance to spend money on anything that does not directly contribute to mission success. There is no gold plating. There is no comfortable margin for error in the budget. The organization has been conditioned by decades of resource scarcity to extract maximum value from minimum expenditure, a discipline that American and European space agencies operating with much larger budgets have never been forced to develop in the same way. The fourth factor, and this is perhaps the most interesting one, is the learning from failure approach to risk. ISRO accepts failure as a cost of development. When the first GSLV missions failed, ISRO studied the failures, fixed the problems, and tried again rather than adding expensive redundancy to prevent failure in the first place. The approach is more failure-tolerant and correspondingly less expensive than the approach taken by agencies that cannot politically afford to fail in public. The fifth factor is technology inheritance. India does not always start from scratch. ISRO engineers study what has worked in other space programs, adapt proven approaches rather than reinventing from first principles wherever possible, and invest original engineering effort where genuine innovation is required. This is efficient engineering rather than prestigious engineering, solving the problem rather than demonstrating novelty. The Mangalyaan Mars mission is the purest expression of all of these principles working together. India's first attempt to reach Mars, the Mars Orbiter mission launched in November 2013, entered Mars orbit in September 2014, and did so on its first attempt something no other country had managed. The entire mission cost $74 million. The engineering team that designed it worked with inherited technology where possible, adapted proven orbital mechanics rather than developing new approaches, used ISRO's existing PSLV launch vehicle rather than developing a new rocket, and designed the spacecraft to be lighter and simpler than comparable American or European Mars orbiters. The mission took advantage of a specific Mars-Earth orbital alignment that allowed the spacecraft to be launched on a trajectory that required less fuel than a more direct route, a piece of orbital mechanics that requires excellent mathematics but not expensive hardware. The planning was brilliant. The hardware was minimal. When Mangalyaan reached Mars, it transmitted images of the red planet. It measured atmospheric composition. It performed the scientific functions it was designed for. And it did all of this for less money than a comparable American mission would have spent on pre-mission studies. Chandrayaan-3, the moon landing mission, tells a slightly different story. It tells the story of ISRO learning from failure. The first Indian moon landing attempt, Chandrayaan-2, failed in 2019. The lander lost communication during its final descent and crashed into the lunar surface. It was a public failure, watched live by Prime Minister Modi and millions of Indians. It was painful, but ISRO's response to the failure was exactly what its institutional culture had prepared it for. The engineers went back to the data. They understood precisely what had failed the guidance software, had not been robust enough to handle a particular sequence of events during the powered descent. They fixed it. They redesigned the landing system. They flew again in 2023. And they succeeded. The total investment in both Chandrayaan-2 and Chandrayaan-3 combined was less than $200 million. 2 missions to the moon. 1 failure that provided critical learning. 1 success that made history for less than a fifth of what NASA's Artemis program costs in a year. What does India's space success mean for India beyond the missions themselves? It means a domestic satellite communications infrastructure that reaches 1.4 billion people. It means weather prediction capability that gives Indian farmers advance warning of the monsoon patterns that determine their livelihood. It means Earth observation capability that monitors glaciers, tracks deforestation, maps agricultural land use, and supports disaster response at a national scale. It means a domestic launch industry, ISRO, and its commercial arm, New Space India Limited, that is increasingly competitive in the commercial satellite launch market, offering launch services at prices that challenge established providers from the United States, Europe, and Russia. And it means something harder to quantify but enormously important for a country of 1.4 billion people that was colonized for 2 centuries and is acutely sensitive to the question of what it can achieve on its own terms. When Chandrayaan-3 touched down on the moon's south pole, the Prime Minister of India watched from South Africa, where he was attending a summit. The control center in Bengaluru erupted. Scientists who had spent years working on the mission cried. It was not just a technical achievement. It was proof of something about what India can build when it commits to building it. The questions about what comes next for India in space are genuinely exciting. India is developing the Gaganyaan mission, its first human spaceflight program. Indian astronauts will fly to orbit on an Indian rocket built by ISRO. The program is running on a budget that would barely cover a single American crewed test flight. India is planning a Venus mission. It is planning a joint mission to the moon with Japan. It is developing a new heavy-lift launch vehicle that will expand the payload capacity available to ISRO. And the Indian private space sector is beginning to emerge, companies building satellites, developing launch vehicles, and creating a commercial space ecosystem that could eventually scale what ISRO demonstrated is possible. The $75 million moon landing was not a one-time achievement. It was a demonstration of a methodology, a proof that the combination of mathematical excellence, engineering discipline, institutional frugality, and willingness to learn from failure can produce results in space exploration that rival and in some cases exceed what much larger budgets have achieved. India reached the moon for $75 million. The question now is not whether India can do it again. The question is where India goes from there. And from the South Pole of the Moon, the answer to that question looks very different than it did from the rubble of a colonial economy in 1962.